This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I'm here with Erica Crawford, who's joining us all the way from New Zealand. How are you today?
I'm really well, thanks. Glad to be back in Canada.
Now, I was just recalling the fact that we first met some 20 or so years ago, just after you had gotten into the business of wine in probably around about 1999. So you started many years ago now, back in 1996, with I believe of an investment of some 20,000 New Zealand dollars, and started with your husband the winery Kim Crawford, which many people may know. You are no longer behind Kim Crawford, but have your own project, Loveblock, which we've been tasting today. But my first question for you would be, what kind of evolution and changes have you seen in the world of Marlborough wines since you started way back in 1996?
The explosion of growth has been phenomenal. You know, way back in 1996, I think there were about 98 registered wineries. Now there's some 700.
700 now?
Yes, and that's not including the individual brands. We've seen the growth not only... We've seen the growth of Sauvignon Blanc, but in those early years, we sold as much unoaked Chardonnay, Riesling, Merlot as we sold Sauvignon Blanc. Because, especially in North America, people weren't really aware of New Zealand as a winemaking region. In fact, across the border, we always travelled with a map, and we had to show people where New Zealand was, and go through the facts of life of New Zealand. And it's only really when Lord of the Rings happened that New Zealand was raised into the general consciousness of the US. So things have changed a lot, and that's when Sauvignon Blanc also tipped. And now it comprises 86% of all the exports that leave New Zealand is Sauvignon Blanc.
Well, I mean, the Sauvignon Blanc, as soon as people mention Sauvignon Blanc, people think of New Zealand now, something that is a fact that's much to the chagrin of the French, I think. But it's interesting because the Sauvignon Blanc is synonymous with New Zealand now. What kind of changes have you seen in the winemaking styles in Marlborough when it comes to Sauvignon Blanc since you first started?
I think when we first started, and a few years before, the Sauvignon is perhaps a little bit more tropical. I don't know if you remember those years.
Oh yes, very much so.
And as we experimented, if I say we, I mean the royal we experimented, it then took its own direction into just the raising of the aromatics and the thiols. So we, all those dense canopies happened, and other techniques just to give you that Marlborough lift. And now I think it's time that we start looking perhaps at evolving that style. That is something that's still very distinctly Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, but maybe something different. There's place for another style as well.
Now, when that comes to Loveblock, what kind of explorations have you made in expanding the Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc style?
So I think you'll find with Loveblock, especially Sauvignon Blanc is the most expressive of the style. The nose is not as boisterous as you would expect from your standard Marlborough style.
A little more reserved.
A little bit more reserved, but the complexity and the texture of the mouthfeel and palate, I think, is where the real interest sits.
And what do you put that down to? How do you bring that about?
Well, firstly, it's largely dependent on the viticulture, sort of how you manage the vines, and I think with organic and low intervention grape growing, we see a lot of that naturally happening. For instance, we don't use herbicides, so there's more competition with weeds and cover crops. So you'll find that the roots have to dig a bit deeper for nutrients and water, and therefore the canopy is a little bit more open, and therefore your fruit's naturally a little bit more tropical, and your nose is a little bit more constrained. And in some of the winemaking styles, of course, there's quite a departure as well. Firstly, it's that first addition of sulfur at the harvester that we don't do, that you ordinarily do, that also protects the grapes from oxidizing and give you a further Marlborough, that lift, the aromatic lift. And of course, in the winery, your selection of yeasts is much narrower, for instance, so there's a lot of stuff that you can and cannot do. So it's much less meddling and interfering, and it really, I think these wines just truly speak of a place, in my view.
What would you say the biggest challenges were to farming organically in your region?
I think that in the Awatere Valley and in Marlborough in general, we don't realise how lucky we are, and that it's very well suited for organic farming. Firstly, it's not humid, so you don't get that infestation so quickly. Secondly, it's quite windy, so that keeps it dry and aerated. And thirdly, it's never very hot. So it's really perfect for grape growing. What we saw in the beginning, we had some vineyards that were converted, and it's a bit like going off coffee. You know how your body goes into that 3 or 4 day shock. So these guys have.
I get that with beer usually.
Yeah, that's the same thing. But so these guys have to go through a 3 or 4 year cycle. So the first 3 years, they really jump from one to the next, and now we see the vines being more resistant, and we see, for me, I think definitely a more textural component happening.
So they find their own balance after about 3 years.
I think they do. Yes, yeah.
And what kind of size of operation do you have these days?
So much smaller than what we did before.
Oh yes. Yeah.
So in terms of how much cases we make, we send the bulk of what we make is sold in the US.
Mm-hmm.
We also sell a little bit into Australia, Japan, UK, and of course 2 provinces in Canada. So we at about 25,000 cases, which is quite small.
Yeah, I was about to say,
yes.
That's well, compared to what you were doing before, most certainly. But,
and and also the US is so big.
Yes, yeah. So there's not a lot to go around actually.
No, but with this project we practice the estate concept. So all the grapes used to make the wine comes from family-owned vineyards. So we don't buy in from grape growers, which means we control the viticultural practice, we control the crop, we control the quality, and we control the blend. So if you lose a grower, you don't lose a specific part of your blend. So it really all leads to consistency.
Now, your background in the wine business has normally always been focused on sales and marketing, but I believe that recently you've been dabbling in viticulture.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of assets tied up in vineyard land, and I think it's our responsibility to be right on top of it. But also, I think with this kind of grape growing and farming, you really do need to be a lot more involved. You can't be hands off. So I'm currently struggling my way through postgraduate viticulture, and I really find the going quite tough sometimes with all the work. Yeah.
But you do enjoy your soil work, I believe.
That's probably where I get the most joy from.
Superb. Erica, thank you very, very much for joining us at Good Food Revolution today. It's great to see you again, and we look forward to tasting your wines tomorrow at the big New Zealand show.
Thank you, and great to be back.
Bye for now.
Bye.